Crimson Bride, Chapter 12, Showtime. This was it. What Mick had worked so hard for so long had finally paid off. He had a story. He had evidence. A location. Now all he needed was to catch her on film. He was going down the rabbit hole. Only, was this a rabbit hole Mick wanted to go further down? He knew now why Williams had died. Why his client died, and why Williams lingered, killing those who had wronged her. The building itself must have been one of great Victorian craftsmanship once. Now it was a burnt-out husk, left to rot, overgrown with moss, trees, and grass. The scorch marks and the fire damage were visible from the outset. An unsettling feeling came over Mick, but he could not afford to turn back now. He had a story to prove. Only question is, will this all be worth it in the end? Margaret had now killed everyone who had wronged her in her life. Would she still have a reason to linger on in death? Jenkins said her spirit would now be bound to Harrow Hall, unless her body was removed from her long-forgotten ramshackle grave, and whatever was left of her remains salted and burned. What resistance would Mick and the team come across, should they find her remains? Mick prayed, and prayed hard, that the woman in red, the Crimson Bride, would know and understand the righteous intentions which the three of them meant to give Margaret the rest she so needed and deserved. Besides, Mick told himself it made for good TV. People loved that kind of closure. Okay, let's get out of this rust bucket and make some money and tell the story of Harrow Hall. After all the shit that happened in town, you're still wanting to go through with this, said Selina as she unbuckled her seatbelt, tried the door handle, and when it wouldn't open, shoved it with her shoulder. I got it. We have bills to pay. Besides, you need the money more than I do and you're bitching about morality? Hey, lovebirds, we're here now. And if a spook decides to show up, I brought this. Susie unveiled a 9mm Glock in front of the team. Jesus, where'd you get that thing? Selina shouted, alarmed at Susie's little friend. Hey, if you work in journalism long enough, you know when you need a gun. The reporter brushed off the firearm like it was not a big deal. Look, come on. I don't care if she's packing a gun, knife, or stick of dynamite. Let's just get this done, Mick said, sighing. They tried to enter through the main door with no luck. It was locked, sealed shut after decades of rust and neglect. Mick suggested simply picking the lock. Selina suggested kicking the door down. Susie suggested shooting and climbing through a second-floor window. Why wouldn't my idea work? Mick inquired. Because the locks are rusted. Better than your idea. Ignoring Mick's remark, Selina continued, hers, she nodded towards Susie, wouldn't work 'cause she's in a skirt. Unless you want to show Mick your panties? Selina pointed out. How about leaving your quarrels at your apartment? I thought I was working with professionals here. Susie barked back at the pair. And no, I didn't think of that. Her face turned red. They looked at her with red faces of their own and stopped talking. Selina walked around the passenger's side of the car, opened the trunk, bent over and grabbed her camera. After she straightened up, she looked over at Mick, a smile on her face, and shouted, Mickey, get your lazy ass over here and help a lady out. With pleasure. He walked over to her and grabbed 2 duffel bags from the back, put one on the ground and shut the trunk. So, Susie asked, as she looked at the large double doors that led to the biggest story of their lives, how do we get in? Mick picked the duffel bag off the ground and the two of them walked over to stand beside Susie. All three of them stared at their destiny. The trio scoped the grounds of Harrow Hall to see if they could find a way in, or anything to pry open the doors. They searched for over an hour before Selina shouted from the back of the building, "Over here! I've found something that might work." Mick, who had gone to the left of the place, ran round the back. At the same time, Susie came running round from the right side. "What'd you find?" Mick asked. "Did you find a way to break in?" Susie echoed. Selina was leaning against a wall, a self-satisfied smile wide on her face. She said nothing, and simply stuck her thumb, pointed it, to the left of her. Mick and Susie both walked closer to Selina to get a better look at exactly what she was pointing to. "Oh, so that's why you've got that smile on your face," Mick said, after seeing what she was pointing at was another door. Only this one was on the floor. Evidently the fire crew and the cops had done enough damage to it when they first searched for survivors that the door hinge had broken and no one had bothered to seal it back up. Selina said, "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get in there and make this happen." "Damn!" Susie held her nose tight. "This place stinks worse than a New York public toilet." She had been the first to enter the building. "Keep focused. Let's get the equipment set up," Mick said. They were all on edge now. This was the home of the Crimson Bride, and the source of everything they had gone through over the last few days. The halls were worn and rotted, yet juxtaposedly preserved. Like an ancient tomb, the trio had opened for the first time in 1,000 years. Layers of dust and cobwebs everywhere, the smell of decay, mould, and old urine assaulted their senses. Yet, anything that had not rotted away or been destroyed by the fire was still there. If you were to walk around this place, you would think it was still a working asylum. Papers and patient charts were all still in their right places. This only added to the team's sense of unrest, as though they were being watched by the burnt but still living building itself. They walked deeper into the asylum until they found a big open space that must have been used as a common area for patients and a reception for visitors. Mick looked around, then turned back to the two women and said, "I think this is the place to set up." His voice echoed in the large open area, and he put both duffel bags down on the broken tiled floor. He bent down and opened the bag to his right, and started pulling out stands for Selina's camera, large set lights on telescopic poles, and large folded shiny bits of material which, when unfolded, were in fact reflective circles that could be used to balance out colour on the camera. Once that bag was empty, he zipped it up and threw it into one of the adjacent rooms. Selina, who had just finished making sure her camera was set up correctly and placed it on one of the tripods from the first bag, unzipped the bag to Mick's left. She rummaged around the bag for a moment and then pulled out 3 small boxes with a nest of wires coming from them. She looked over to Susie and threw one of them to her. Susie caught the box and looked at it. "Microphones. Nice." Then looked down at herself and asked Selina, "Do I look okay? This isn't exactly my normal gig, so I thought something like this would bring in more viewers." Susie was wearing a very short black leather miniskirt and white shirt which was tied just above her navel. All of the buttons had been removed, so her cleavage showed. She was clearly not wearing a bra. Selina looked her up and down, pacing as she looked. "My dear, you will double our ratings in that. Now get your mic on. We have work to do." Selina began to remove her top, which was a plain black polo shirt. "Whoa, what are you doing?" asked a very embarrassed Susie. "Oh, relax. We're both girls and he's seen it all before." Mick looked over at Selina with a big grin on his face. "Well, he hasn't seen mine and he isn't going to either." With that, Susie simply clipped the box to the back of her skirt like she had 1,000,000 times before, and slipped the microphone wire under the top and clipped it on. She tucked the loose wire under the waistband of her top, so that from the front you couldn't see the wire at all. Selina rolled her eyes, then clipped the mic box to the waistband of her grey suit pants, and then slipped the long wire under her bra. "Nice view," Mick said. "Down, boy. Wait till we get done with this job," she retorted flirtingly, before putting her top back on and clipping the mic to her collar. Mick followed suit and clipped his mic on too. After a few moments, Susie also finished getting her mic set up. She looked puzzled and then asked, "Why does Selina need a microphone?" "Because she will be on screen if she hears or sees something. Or if one of you gets horribly murdered by the spook," she laughed. "Anyway, let's get this mic check done." Mick ran over to the laptop he'd set up while the women were getting their mics on and typed on a few keys. Then asked both of them to speak into their mics. Susie went first. 1, 2, 1, 2, check, check. Is it working yet?" "Okay, got it," Mick replied. Next they set up the lights, which were not normal yellow or white light, but a pale blue. "What are you doing with the blue lights?" asked Selina. Mick stood up from tightening a bolt on one of the lights and said simply, "Atmosphere." Selina and Mick both did their mic checks successfully. Now it was time for the first walkthrough. This required Mick and Susie to walk from one end of the common area to the other, setting the pace and timing of the script to the next section, which was to be Margaret's own room. It took them only 4 attempts to get it right. Then Selina shouted, "Okay guys, let's go for a take." Selina walked hand in hand with Mick back to their starting points. Susie walked just behind them, silently rehearsing her script. "Take 1, Selina said as she focused the camera back on them. Mick started the script once again. "We are here tonight at the mysterious Harrow Hall asylum, where countless people, patients in fact, died in a tragic fire, supposedly set by a patient in an escape attempt. But this tale is not what it seems at first glance. No, this is, in fact, a tale of abuse, betrayal, murder, and revenge from beyond the grave." "That's right," Susie said. "Tonight we tell the tale of Margaret Williams, better known as the Crimson Bride. This woman was reportedly committed here for murdering her ex-fiancé and his mistress on the unhappy couple's own wedding day." Mick took over. "After being committed here to Harrow Hall, she was abused both physically and mentally. An eyewitness even confided in Harrow ghost hunters she may have gotten pregnant by a married doctor. And it was in fact he who set the fire to kill her and her unborn child to save himself. Now she stalks the halls, killing everyone who wronged her. We will now show you the exact room our murderer lived in," Mick said. Suddenly, the blue lights went out. "What the hell?" Selina cursed. Susie, Selina, and Mick felt the room go cold. Their breath began to float out of their mouths like chimney stacks. Even the old windows began to fog up from the cold air. Then the whispers came. At first the sound came just like a breeze, but as it grew, they all heard the words of the Crimson Bride. "Why did you do it?" hissed a female voice. "And on our wedding day? Well, you won't get away with it. I'll kill you both for your betrayal," echoed a malevolent voice in the long, abandoned hallways. The gang looked all around them, yet they saw nothing in the darkness, just a voice in the air of pain and anger. Are you guys hearing this too?" said Susie with a break in her voice. They heard the tapping of shoes coming from one end of the halls, and faint whimpering and crying in the neighbouring rooms. "Hey, is anyone there? Hello?" called out Selina, unsure if she even wanted to hear a response. The tapping of shoes drew closer and closer, and yet no one answered. Suddenly, the gang began to notice that the sun had reappeared, shining a red-orange light through the windows. Clean and unbroken windows. It appeared to be late afternoon again, the last hour before dusk. Everyone rubbed their eyes, dumbstruck, as everything around them appeared to have changed dramatically. Everything appeared to be brand new, as if only fresh out of the factory yesterday, or in this case, yesterday 1959. "Hey, where did you come from?" flinched Susie, startled, turning towards the bed, now with an unrusted frame and cleanish sheets. A young woman was lying on top of it. The mysterious woman looked to be in her mid-20s, lying on the bed, stroking her belly, smiling while staring at the ceiling. She ignored the others in the room, her room. It was as if she didn't even know the team were there. She appeared lost in her own little daydream. "Not long now, little one. Your daddy will come for us here, as he promised. He loves us," said the young woman on the bed in a slightly erratic tone, stroking her stomach tenderly, talking to her belly as most expectant mothers do, as if the child was already in the room. "He will have us released, and me certified sane. Then we will go live happily ever after, out in California." "Are you?" asked Mick curiously. He looked at her hard, examining her face. "No, you can't be." Realization hit him. He knew who this woman was. "Margaret Williams?" called a female voice from the door. "Yes, Nurse Smith," she replied, staring through Mick, and at the woman standing at the door who, when Mick had last seen Mrs. Smith, looked about 85. Now she appeared to be no older than 20. "Is this a goddamn dream?" Mick asked, confused. "I wish it was," remarked Susie, who was now stroking her holster, questioning if what she was seeing was some sort of collective madness or even a time paradox. "Dr. Kennedy is coming to check on you and discuss your medications." Margaret gave a simple, "Okay, I will, this time," in reply. The young Nurse Smith nodded, closed the door, and simply walked away. "Wow, so that was what Mrs. Smith used to look like. If I was 30 years older, I would—" "Behave yourself, Mickey," barked Selina. Then, more shoes tapped outside, getting louder and louder as the tapping grew closer to the door. The door lock clicked open and someone else came to visit the patient. A middle-aged man in a doctor's coat. The patient recognized him immediately and jumped out of the bed and ran over to him. "Kit!" she cried with delight as she ran towards him. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do for now." He had a guilty look on his face, the look of a man who knows he's done something stupid in the heat of the moment, during a lonely night, when he wanted to feel loved and admired. Attention he likely wasn't getting from his wife at home. "You said you'd get us out of here. You lied. You lied, you bastard." Her voice turned into a low, disappointed growl. "It's not that simple, Margaret. I need time." He raised his hands in a gesture for her to calm down. "This is what you say every time," she yelled in his face, then slapped him so hard the impact left an angry red mark across his cheek. Everything went silent. Dr. Kennedy pressed his hand against the heat of his cheek. Then something stirred in his face. Something had snapped. "You crazy bitch!" Either out of a fit of anger or purposefully acted, Kit pushed the young pregnant woman over, cursing at her as he did so. Only, he appeared to have snapped out of his anger as a look of sheer horror cast over his face, trying to catch the young woman as she was falling. But it was far, far too late. Margaret's head hit the floor hard, a crash, followed by a loud crack. Kit stood there paralyzed. Margaret laid still, as blood ran from under her head, dyeing the floor red, flowing towards her murderer's shoes. Then the illusion faded away. The team was in shock. The derelict reality of their surroundings returned. "What the fuck was that?" exclaimed Mick with a slight tremble. They all looked at each other. No one spoke for a moment. Susie was the first to break the silence. That was something." Mick reached into his back pocket, pulled out a flashlight and switched it on. As he lifted it, he dropped it immediately, for what he saw was the unmistakable vision of terror. He was face to face with the Crimson Bride. All ambitions of riches and fame had slipped the trio's thoughts. Their only goal now was to leave this cursed ruins alive. The bride turned her attention to Susie first. Susie pulled out and fired the gun into the pillar of red mist. The bullets just rushed past, right through the spectre and into the wall beyond. The cloud lunged at her. Susie screamed, closed her eyes. Her legs froze. Fear had taken her hostage. The others didn't know what to do. The creature passed through Susie and disappeared, or so it seemed. Then Susie clenched her chest tightly, as if from a sharp and sudden pain. "Susie!" cried Selina in a horror-stricken shriek. She pointed at Susie's stomach. It began to expand like a balloon. It didn't stop. Her abdomen continued to expand and expand. Susie's stomach burst open, spilling a seamlessly endless river of blood, skin, and entrails onto the tiled floor of the asylum. She fell to the floor, her eyes frozen open. Then an army of ugly and vicious rodents began to scurry out of her corpse. Horror washed over the remaining team members as they witnessed as some of the vermin began to feast on Susie's ears and fingers. Those that had not made a feast of their fallen companion turned their attention to Mick and Selina. They knew then Their only option was to run and maybe live, or stay and certainly die, or worse. Instinctively, Mick grabbed Selina's wrist and ran for the ward. Survival was their only goal now. Salting and burning the body was out of the question now, if it was ever an option in the first place. Wait! The gun, Mickey! Get the gun! She cried and ran over to the Glock, near Susie's shredded corpse. Selina snatched the sidearm. With a half-severed finger and deep bites on her ankles for her troubles, and she fell hard. Suddenly, even more rats poured out of poor Susie's corpse. They knew then it was time to get the hell out of there. It was too late. She had remanifested. The bride was back. Run! 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 Selina screamed, scrambling to her feet. Mick looked on in hopeless horror as Susie began to levitate off the sanatorium floor, her eyes bleeding, and she was sent crashing violently into the old rotten walls, gasping and struggling desperately to breathe. Her throat erupted in screams, and her bones snapped like twigs, her flesh twisting like a strung-out towel, with bones and blood exposed in between the mangles of flesh. Mick ran and ran as fast as he could. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. The way Selina died, Susie, it was beyond terror. He could hear the pursuing, bloodthirsty rodents giving chase. He was almost there. Just another ward, then the reception, then the main door. He would be free from this nightmare he had gotten himself into and had caused the deaths of the others. Mick saw the light at the far end of the last ward. I'm almost there. Come on, Mick, you bastard. Move it, soldier. Move. He screamed at himself, hanging on to the scraps of hope he had left. He was desperate to catch his breath, but he knew if he stopped it would result in his death. Another turn and the home stretch. He almost smiled in disbelief. The light began to grow brighter. Headlights of a van? The glow of the moon, maybe? He didn't care. And it didn't matter. He knew this meant he was almost there. In his desperate flight, he almost ran into an old rusty medicine tray. He didn't dare think what the result would be if he had tripped. He knew the answer to that already. Mick reached the reception and pulled the trigger of the gun. Nothing came out of the muzzle. He rolled his eyes and threw the useless firearm away. Fuck! He shouted while he did it. He cast the gun aside, roared loudly and burst out of the main door, into the blinding white light before him. Once free of the hall's clutches, and into the openness of the courtyard, Mick crashed down on his knees, overwhelmed by the sharp pain that ran through him. Fuck, this is gonna bruise, he said aloud to no one, in sick black humor. When he recovered, he heard sirens wailing and helicopters somewhere up ahead whirling. The rats didn't seem to catch up. He made it. Help had come. Then, get on the ground! Keep flat on the ground and put your hands on your head!